Well, ever since China outlined its sweeping reform plans during the third plenum last year, the government has repeatedly said they'll have market forces determine economic policy. Some of the steps they have taken include eliminating the need to get approval to cut red tape. China has also opened more sectors to private investors, including energy, telecoms, and banking. The government has already announced a list of the country's private banks that will be created. In terms of financial reforms, authorities are also slowly rethinking their stance on interest rates. For example, the central bank is now allowing lenders to raise the rates they offer for deposits. Significant land reform was also discussed during the third plenum. Part of those plans include finish all registration of land use rights within 5 years. Well, for more on China's economy, BizAsia America's Philip Yin spoke to Marshall Bouton. He is interim executive director of Asia Society Policy Institute. And Phil asked him why the group's latest report concluded that China's reform plans are realistic.
Well, we did a very thorough, in-depth analysis of the so-called 60 decisions that came out of the third plenum. We broke them down into their constituent parts and reassembled them into the components that would be recognizable to anybody at the IMF. And we came to the conclusion that the reform plans that have been put forward are very much in line with what a classical IMF reform plan would look like. So this is real. This is not a charade. And we further analyzed the signs of early implementation. It's only been a year. But the signs are quite positive, and we are convinced that Xi Jinping's administration is very serious about undertaking the long-awaited overhaul of the Chinese economy to take it to the next stage of market opening and to move from an export and investment-led model to a consumption and domestic-led model. And although the world needs this, China needs it even more.
Is this enough in terms of, I meant specifically, I guess, the pace of it? Is that enough to appease some of the critics out there who would argue that more needs to be done and faster as well?
I think it has diminished the skepticism toward the reforms, and there was frankly ample basis for that skepticism given the failed efforts of the previous administration in Beijing. But it's not yet enough to convince people that Beijing will take the really hard decisions that are still coming. There's still much to be done, but the early signs are promising.
In terms of financial reforms, I'm going to go through some of these, but a lot of it has to do with the credit and the banking system itself. Some are saying that more needs to be done to reduce the amount of sort of black loaning or the gray market of loaning. We can call it whatever you want. The bottom line is that they're not official stats on these numbers, and the Chinese government's trying to rein that in a bit. Are you pleased with the direction that that's going?
Yes, no, the early signs on financial liberalization or financial reform, including new regulatory mechanisms in the financial sector, getting the market more into the allocation of capital are very good, whether it's in the rationalization of insurance or an interest rate reform. There are, again, early signs, and that's probably the most urgent area for reform. The longer term and very deeply important aspect of reform is governance reform. And there's early evidence on that front, too, as well. The anti-corruption campaign that Xi Jinping's administration has set in motion is important. It's important there may be more transparency, more delegation of authority from central government ministries to independent, or at least more independent regulatory authorities. Competition policy needs to be aligned. The early signs on competition policy are on one hand promising, on the other hand concerning, because the early efforts to introduce competition policy have preceded the creation of strong regulatory standards. And as a result, some of the actions that have been taken under competition, in the name of competition policy, have been and are perceived to be discriminatory. But that can be corrected in time as well.